But when I think of these 42 years, 1968 till 2010, I think the church, Mennonite Church in Canada, is much stronger now than it was when I was a teenager. Sometimes we don't think that. Sometimes we think the church has gone downhill, or it's going to pot, or it's going so on declining. I don't think so. I think in those things that are in some way measurable, there are a lot of things that aren't measurable, but in those things that are somewhat measurable, I think the church is much stronger today than it was when I was younger. And let me just name some of those. Simple things like numbers. We're much bigger than we were back when I was young, when I started. Both in terms of membership and in terms of the numbers of congregations. And you saw some of those numbers earlier this week. We have many more congregations than we did then. We're much more ethnically diverse than we were then. The gender balances have shifted, and the role of women and men in our church has shifted dramatically. We are much more present in urban settings, which we weren't then. Our organizations, our institutions, our schools, MCC, MDS, CPT, all that is much stronger than they were back then. Their programs and their outreach have just multiplied, it's very, very, very much. The way we engage society, the way we are ecumenical, is much stronger than we were back then. Financially, the financial potential of our church today is much higher than it was back then. And this may sound strange, and this is not as measurable. I think our Anabaptist identity is stronger today than it was then. And I think our peace identity is stronger today than it was then. When I look at our young people and our young adults, they are miles ahead of where my peers and I were when I was in university or a young adult. So in almost every way that is measurable, the church, the Mennonite Church in Canada, is much stronger than it was 42 years ago. And I thank God for that. And I think it's important to say that, because like I said, sometimes we get ourselves into a spiral where we actually think the opposite, where we actually think the church is weak or weakened. So I leave that with you. We are at a point of strength, and we move forward into the future with strength. Having said that, another point of kind of state of the union, I think the demographic issue of our church is very, very significant. Mention has already been made of the baby boom generation. There was not a lot of mention made in the presentation about the generations that preceded the baby boomers. In other words, I was born not in 46, because that's the start of the baby boom. I was born in 45. But that generation, myself and the people that are older than me, have carried the church for decades in terms of leadership, in terms of finances, and in terms of other ways. And now the baby boom generation is doing the same. And this wave has gone and is going through our society ever since the Second War. And those of us will remember some of that, right? When this wave hit elementary school, our governments had to build elementary schools all over the place. And when this wave finished elementary school, they shut down elementary schools. And then they built high schools. And then they had to build more universities. And then when this wave got to be families, then Lee Iacocca had this brainstorm that we needed minivans. And he saved Chrysler. It was on the brink of bankruptcy. And he saved Chrysler by building minivans because that generation was starting to have children. And that wave has just gone through. Right now, that wave is at the point of condominiums. Condominiums, health institutions, recreational properties, lakefront properties. That's where the wave is now. But it's that wave that has sustained and guided and directed and financed and given leadership to the church for these last 40, 50 years. The danger that I see is that now that that wave is at a stage where it will stop or begin to stop, we will begin to see that as a decline of the church. And I want to ask us all not to interpret that as a decline of the church. This is a normal demographic progression, and it will affect us, it will challenge us, it will make a huge difference in our church, but it's not a decline. It's not a failure of the church. It is the outcome of a natural demographic process. And I think that will be important as we move into the future, because our temptation will be to become depressed and to think that we can't do it anymore. A third point, the difficulties and challenges of being Christian and being the church in Canada in the 21st century and the 20th century have honed us and pruned us and have forced us to face more squarely the essential vocation of being the church. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The idea of missional church in 1940 would have seemed ludicrous, because we didn't need missional church at that time. We had a missional Christendom, or at least we thought we did. And in many ways, this is strengthening us. We are less apologetic than we were in pursuing our vocation. This doesn't mean that things will be easy or simple. Indeed, it is my sense, and I've written about this, you may have read it, my sense that the next years will be tough in Canada. I think the soil in Canada is hard. When Jesus talks about the various soils, I think the soil in Canada is hard. And Montreal, for example, we were told a couple of months ago that 50 years ago in the city of Montreal, 94% of the population were in some way significantly connected to the church. And today they told us that number is 1%. So it has gone from 94 to 1% in less than 50 years. So Canada is not a simple place for the church to flourish. And it will not be a simple place for the church to flourish in the next 20, 30, 40 years. I think it's important to say that and to recognize it, but it is an important place for the church to be and to flourish. But it is one of the signs of the times. Another thing, of course, the much analyzed post-Constantinian society, post-Christendom society, post-modern society, all those things I won't define. If you don't know what those mean, it's fine, you're in good company, neither do I. But I do know that these things affect us on a daily basis, and pastors know this. Pastors know that these things are present in their pews every single Sunday and all the time. And they are things that we will need to learn to work with and to engage, and even to see as opportunities. Some of these will be helpful, some of these directions. Some of these will be difficult. I just heard now in May at the Canadian Council of Churches meetings where Project Plowshares